Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Scott's Synth Stuff, and welcome to the world of synthesizers. You've got your very first synthesizer for Christmas this year, and you're wondering, how do I work this thing? What do all these knobs and buttons do? This video is a basic introduction to synthesizers and synthesis, and will get you to a point where you can create sounds on pretty much any synthesizer that has this standard type of layout coming up. I thought, well, maybe I'll do like a montage or a ModiX video, and here's your first synthesizer and here's how to work it, but that's kind of pointless because how many people are going to have a montage as their first synthesizer? Not many, but even maybe a ModiX, and then that's only good for a certain group of people. But I thought if you are new to synthesizers, it doesn't really matter what kind of synthesizer you have, because when it comes down to it, the base concepts behind how they work is the same for all of them. And once you have those basics down, you can use that knowledge to operate and program and create sounds on any synthesizer without actually knowing how to work that individual synthesizer. All right, so let's talk about the architecture of how synthesizers are constructed and how they work. So a synthesizer just creates sound from an oscillator. An oscillator is an electronic circuit, or in some cases like the Summit here, it's a computer chip that emulates an electronic circuit, and that electronic circuit vibrates at a certain rate. So the sound that it creates depends on the shape that that oscillator circuit moves in. If it's a very smooth up and down wave, called a sine wave, you get a very smooth sound out of it. You would get that sound if you blew across the mouth of a bottle, because that's basically the exact same thing. You're vibrating the resonant cavity of that bottle, and you get a smooth wave coming out of it that sounds just like that. If we change it to a triangle, it's going to make a little more sharp sound. You can hear it's kind of got a high frequency fizz to it. And that's from the sharp edges of that wave. Now if we do a sawtooth where it's going up and then down and then up and then down all at once, now we have a much sharper cutoff. We get a much brassier sound. And we say brass, there's a reason for that, because if you think about it, when you're playing a trumpet or other brass instrument, you're in effect creating a sawtooth wave with your mouth. You're blowing through a little mouthpiece, and you use your embouchure to do that, and your lips are pushing open, and it goes up and then down and closes, and then it's up, open at once, and then it closes. And so it's actually creating a triangle wave similar to what we're doing here. So that's an analog to that. And there are far more different waves. You can get a square wave that goes up and then straight down, and then up and then straight down. And then you can, what if you made it so it goes up for only a short amount of time and then it stays down for a long time, and you can change that. So that makes different sounds there as well. And then of course you can get into crazy oscillators that are called wavetables, and these are basically almost samples, and it could be a capture of a drum sound, or maybe a bird chirping, or pretty much anything you wanted to. And these wavetable sounds could be anything at all. Each of them has a different type of harmonic. So let's talk about what a harmonic is. So if we have a sine wave, we have what's called a fundamental frequency. So if we play A, which is 440 hertz, we have a sine wave that is creating a 440 hertz tone. And that's it. There's no other overtones or harmonics. What happens if we change that to a sawtooth? Now we have what's called harmonics. You can hear these high frequency fizzy sounds. So if you hear the difference between sine and a sawtooth, it's the same pitch, but the sawtooth has a whole bunch of fizzy sounds up that are much, much higher frequency than the fundamental frequency. Those are called harmonics. I'm not going to go into the math of how harmonics are created. Just know that different sounds have different types of harmonics, and those harmonics are what determines the timbre of the sound, or what it actually sounds like to you. our speech is made up of specific harmonics called formants, and the way that our mouth moves changes those harmonics. Ow, ow. So I'm changing the harmonics of by changing the shape of my mouth, and that changes the timbre of the sound that's coming out of my voice. So we are going to be able to use those harmonics later on, but that's basically how the oscillators are created. Now, most synthesizers have 2 or more oscillators. Older ones, like I have over here an SH-101, I've got a Juno 106 and a Poly 6. And the synthesizer manufacturers originally had just a single oscillator per voice, and we'll talk about voices in just a minute, and because that was all that they could afford to do. But they found that in order to get bigger sounds, if they had 2 or more oscillators, it created a fatter, more pleasing sound. But that was expensive because now you had to duplicate all the hardware to create extra voices every time you pressed a key. So how they did it on the Juno 106 is after the fact they added a chorus, which kind of doubles up the sound. So I'm going to turn off the chorus. I'll turn on the chorus. You can hear the difference because it's adding multiple copies of the original oscillator. Instead of having multiple oscillators, it just adds more copies of it after the fact. Whereas on the SH-101, you get 1 oscillator, that's all you get. The Poly 6, again, 1 oscillator, but it does have the effects or chorus that you can add afterwards to try to fatten that up. Like the System 8 up above has 2 oscillators, but it also has a sub-oscillator, and the sub-oscillator is basically just a low-frequency oscillator. Sometimes it's just a square wave, but it is used just to bring an octave or a lower end of the sound. The Summit has 3 oscillators, and if I have one playing and then bring up the second one, and then bring up the third one, so now there's 3 oscillators, but they're all doing the exact same thing. So if I change them just slightly, and what I did was I altered the pitch just very gently of the second and the third oscillator. So now they're kind of just a little bit out from the first oscillator. And you can hear it's warmer and more interesting than just having 1 oscillator. So that's a way that you can use multiple oscillators to create sounds. Now you're not limited to doing just that with oscillators. You can also change pitches and have them play chords, for instance. So now the first oscillator is playing the fundamental. The second oscillator is playing a tritone above, 5 notes above. So now I'm playing chords just by playing 1 key because the 2 oscillators are tuned to different pitches. So the oscillators are always playing in the background. That's called free-running oscillators. Now, some digital oscillators, when they first started emulating analog oscillators using digital synthesizers, some of them, they did not actually do that. They had the oscillator only start when you pressed a key. That was a problem because every time you press a key, all 3 oscillators started their waves at the exact same point in phase, and it didn't sound as real as it should. Now most digital oscillators have what's called free-running oscillators, and the oscillators are always going and they drift apart from each other over time. So, and you press a key, instead of starting the oscillator then, the oscillator is always playing, and instead it just opens up what's called an envelope so that we can hear the oscillator. And we'll talk about envelopes in just a moment. So let's go back to our sawtooth sound. Next, we can talk about the filter. The filter is a device that chops off either the top frequencies, the high end, or the bottom frequencies, the low end. And we have a high pass, which allows the high frequencies and chops off the low, or we have a low pass, which chops off the high frequencies and lets the low through. We can also have a band pass, which is where it chops off both the top and the bottom, and then it just leaves the middle coming through, and you can move the position, the frequency of that middle around and how wide that middle is going to be. So let's have a listen to what that actually sounds like. If I have a low pass filter, so it's going to let only the low frequencies through and cut out the top frequencies, and we can adjust how much that's going to do. Now I'm going to play a note and I'm going to adjust the cutoff frequency to start killing off the top end frequencies. So here we have all the frequencies through. as I adjust it, you can hear those top end frequencies going away until all we're left with is very low frequencies. So we can do the same thing with a high pass, where it's going to get rid of all the low end frequencies. As I turn it up, and all we're left with is a buzz, because if we're listening at with it turned off, we hear the fundamental, which is that low note. But as I start turning it, we're going to lose the fundamental frequency, and all we're going to hear left are the harmonics, which is that fizz. So now we can just hear the fizzy harmonics of this sound. We could do a band pass, where it's just moving the center that allows pass from the low end to the top end. And as you go to the low, you lose the top. If you go to the top, you lose the low. So let's go back to our standard low pass filter. And we're going to talk about one other thing, and that's called resonance. Resonance is emulating a filter that resonates at a specific frequency. And that frequency is the cutoff frequency. So what happens is resonation enhances or amplifies the sound at that specific frequency. As I play a note and then adjust the frequency downwards, it's going to act exactly as it did before when we had it set up as a standard low pass filter. However, now I'm going to bring in some resonance, and it's going to bring up the sound at that specific cutoff frequency, and it's going to give it a very specific sound. I think you're going to recognize this. So I'm going to adjust it down. Now I'm going to add resonance in. You can hear at that one cutoff frequency, it's actually getting louder. Now, if I adjust the frequency with the resonant turned up, you're going to hear it move that resonant frequency down through the audio spectrum. And I'm sure you recognize that sound. That's the sound of a resonant filter. You can do things like push the resonance up so far that it self-oscillates. So without even having a sound, it can actually oscillate. I've turned up the resonance all the way, and now it's the resonant filter is at the very, very bottom end, and it creates some very low frequency sounds. If you think about it though, as I play higher notes, it's got higher frequencies, and if I play lower notes, it got lower frequencies. So if I have the filter set to just one frequency, it's not going to work very well, because if it's letting through frequencies up here, then all the stuff down here is going to be unaffected. And if I have it affecting these down here, then by the time I get up here, it's going to be all muted. So we have what's called key tracking, which basically does the same thing as turning this knob the higher up we press. And now this one has a knob called key tracking. Most synthesizers have the same sort of thing. And that way, it opens and moves the cutoff frequency as you press the keys. So if I have the resonance turned up all the way, and it's self-oscillating, remember, without any sound going in, I can now play the resonant frequency filter like a keyboard by adjusting the key tracking. What you're hearing there is not an oscillator, it's actually playing the filter. And a resonant filter is always a sine wave. So even if your synthesizer, like an old Juno 106, or especially the SH101 that has no sine oscillator in it, you can actually make a sine wave sound come out of it simply by playing the filter like I'm doing here. All right, so that's the filter. Let's turn this back to some sensible values. It's still pretty boring sounding to me. The next step is the amplitude. The amplitude is what allows the volume to change over time. And every synthesizer that you are going to come across pretty much is going to have what's called an ADSR envelope. Attack, decay, sustain, release. Confusingly, the first two and the last one are time, and the third one is level. there are some synthesizers, like I have a JD800 over there, that has more. It has like a delay, attack, hold, sustain. So there's extra steps in it, but for the most part, pretty much every synthesizer you're going to find today is going to have a standard ADSR. So attack is how quickly does the sound start sounding when you press the key. If I push it up, you can hear the volume comes up slowly. And the farther I push this up, the longer it takes to get there. Similarly, the release is how long the release continues to play after you let go of the key. If I push it up, actually I'm going to turn the attack down and turn the release up. So you can hear it instantly turns on, but when I let go of it, it takes some time to play, to fade away. And the reason you're still hearing is it fade away because remember, the oscillator is always playing. So even though you've let up on the key, the oscillator still keeps sounding and it's going through that ADSR envelope, and that release gradually fades away the amount. It's just basically a volume control, but it's an automated volume control. So we have attack and decay and sustain. So sustain is a level. So if I put the sustain much lower, then what's going to happen is it's going to attack, decay, and then the decay is going to go down to the sustain level, and when I let go of the key, then it's going to go fade from there on the release to 0. So as you can see, I moved the sustain down quite a bit, so now it's quite a bit quieter. So if I move the decay up a little ways and then sustain down, what's going to happen? I've got the attack at 0. So it's going to start with a full volume, and then the decay is going to hit, and it's going to reduce the volume to the sustain level, which is what it's going to play as long as I hold the key down. And then as I let it go of the key, then it's going to go through the release where it gradually goes down to 0. What does that give us? It's kind of like a piano sound. So we've got a loud sound, it holds, and let it go. So let's turn the release up, and release up a bit more. And it goes away. If I bring the sustain down more and a little bit more decay, you can hear it takes longer to get to that quiet part. Or if I bring the decay way down, we can get almost a pluck sound, because it's very quickly starting at full volume, quickly going down to the decay level, and then as I let go, it's going to go away. And if I get rid of the release altogether, we get a pluck sound. What if we put the sustain at 0? What's going to happen now is I'm going to hit a key, it's going to go to full volume, and then the decay is going to quickly bring it down to sustain level, which is 0. And because it's already at 0, the release doesn't matter because it's going to release from 0 to 0, which is 0. So if we play that, we get a plucky sound. And if we add up more decay, we could add more attack. And of course, you can play multiple notes as well, if your synthesizer supports it. All right, so that's our amplitude envelope. I'm going to reset that back to something more reasonable. We also have the ability to do the exact same thing on the filter. We can have an envelope that operates the filter the same way the ADSR envelope operates the amplifier. So now I've got this envelope here. If I have the same thing, if I have a short attack, no sustain, 0 sustain, no release, and I can play with a decay, you can hear it close the filter as I press each key. If I bring the sustain up, it holds it open more. And if I bring the attack up, so now I've got the attack and the decay coming up and then back down. And you can hear how it opens and closes the filter automatically. And then we can offset the bias of that by changing the frequency, and we can maybe add some resonance. If we bring the attack down, and if we close the frequency down such that it actually completely closes all of the resonant filter, we can get a plucky bass sound. So that's how we can alter the sound dynamically by altering both the amplitude and the filter envelopes. Next, you're going to see something called an LFO. So let's go back to our initialize. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. It's another type of oscillator that is much slower than an audio level. So you could slow it down to once per second. So it's just coming up and down slowly. And then we can connect that to modify other things. Different synthesizers do this in different ways. Some of them have it so that you have to go through a mod matrix. Some of them have knobs that allow you to alter it. So Summit has LFO1, and I can say LFO1 depth on the filter, which is going to tell the synthesizer how much I want the LFO1 to alter the filter. So I'm going to turn up LFO1 depth. And then I can change the speed of LFO. And if I turn it up fast enough, it can actually alter it to the point where it becomes a different sound altogether. I also have another LFO. I have LFO2 that I could assign to amplitude or pretty much anything else. Maybe I want to switch this to a wave shape, and then I want to have LFO1 alter the shape of the wave that we're using. Well, let's move this into a... So let me take it off the filter and put it onto the shape of oscillator 1 when it's in a square wave. And that will allow me to change the shape sound and modulate the sound of the wave that I'm actually producing for that oscillator. I could hook up LFO2 to say, hey, I want to change the pitch. So LFOs allow you to make the sound change in a way that gives it more feel and more dynamic and more motion. You can also have some LFOs, like this one has a delay on it, so you can say I want it to affect it, but only after I've held the note down for just a few seconds. There are different wave shapes and forms that you can use for some LFOs. This one, you can set it up as a sample and hold, for instance, which is a great one, which it just plays random notes. Fun. Something else I wanted to mention was filter drive. Once the sound comes out of the oscillator, before it goes into the filter, it has a set amount of harmonics to it. So if I open this up, so you can hear that's the bass sound, and it may or may not have some harmonics. What if we wanted it to have more harmonics because there's not enough in there for the filter to do anything with? Because remember, the filter is filtering out the top end of the harmonics. If I switch this to a sine wave, it has no harmonics. The filter does nothing because there's no harmonics to filter out. and it doesn't do anything until I get down to the fundamental frequency, and then it just goes away. So the filter doesn't really do anything at all in terms of a sine wave. So we have what's called filter drive, which takes the signal coming out of the oscillators and amplifies it. It can amplify it so loud that it starts to distort or overdrive. And by doing so, it introduces harmonics because the circuitry is limited as to how loud it can drive it. And when it gets to the limits of how loud it can drive, it then just starts to distort. Just like if you turned your stereo up so loud it starts to distort, that's exactly what the drive does. So now I've got this boring sine tone that has no harmonics at all, and I'm going to add some harmonics into it by turning on the filter drive. Now I've got lots of harmonics to play with, and now I can use the filter, and it actually has an effect and actually does something because it has harmonics to filter. This synthesizer also has a noise oscillator to it, which is just that. And because noise is all frequencies, it sounds the same no matter what key you press, but if you have the filter open with key tracking, you can actually play noise. You typically wouldn't do that, but what you would do is add noise to an existing sound. Just gives it a little different sound. So now let's add some effects. Pretty much every synthesizer you have in the last 30 years is going to have some kind of onboard effects that allow you to modify the sound. We can add some distortion, chorus. What about some delay? We can put some delay in there. And lastly, reverb. And the Summit has, hands down, the best reverb I've ever heard on a synthesizer. Cool. All right, that is my introduction to synthesis and programming sounds on the synthesizer. I obviously have just brushed the very surface of a lot of these things, but I hope what I've done gives you some idea of how synthesizers create sounds and allow you to take that information and look at another synthesizer, maybe the System 8 like I have up here, which has the exact same thing. Oscillator 1, Oscillator 2, Oscillator 3, which is the sub-oscillator, mixer, filter, amplifier, and then effects. Exactly the same as the Summit. And if you look at the Hydrasynth, same thing. Oscillator, filter, mixer, effects. Same thing on the Modal Cobalt 8, although it only has 2 oscillators instead of 3, but it does some other tricks to fatten up the sound. The Wave State, Op6, totally different beasts. Op6 doesn't have oscillators, it uses FM operators. The Wave State works with just samples, but if you look on there, you're going to find mixer, amplitude, filters. The same paradigm applies even if the sound source is a sample, an actual sound like it is on the Wave State. Same thing on the Montage. The Montage has thousands and thousands of samples in there. Piano samples. But if you go into it, if you start learning the programming of the Montage, you'll see in there filters, envelopes, effects, all exactly the same as all these other synthesizers. So once you get that down, once you've learned that concept and how to operate it, the world is your oyster. You can apply that to every synthesizer that you come across. I hope this has been of some help to you. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. And if I could get you to click like on this video and subscribe to the channel, really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.